It's snowing outside here in Portland, Maine, as I record this. So I'm now switching to my official snow glass that shows the little town with the snow on it. Um, Today we are going to delve into the Portland transcript of December 1842. Here's the volume. Specifically, this is the December 24 Christmas Eve edition. And this is an interesting one for a couple different reasons. First of all, on the front page of this edition is a story called The Mysterious Blank by a Down Easter. Well, Down East is the Portland area, southern Maine. And a Down Easter is somebody from that area. Well, this was Matthew. December 24, we're now talking roughly a year after Matthew would have written The Raven. We're talking the second Christmas since Abby died. And it was January of that year, 1842, that Matthew would have handed over his and Abby's manuscript of A Christmas Carol in Boston to Dickens. So Dickens had not used it that Christmas, but this story, The Mysterious Blank, I believe was written, co-authored by Mathew and Abby, just as A Christmas Carol had been. Whether that's a coincidence or a message, I don't know. This is a humorous story, and it has to do with people who go yard sailing, people who are kind of upscale, and they imagine that they're buying this very important antique high back chair, and it's shown at a gala event, an important event, and they open up the seat, and it turns out that it was a toilet, basically. Something's still in there. See, so it's just a satire on. Basically, it's Abby's satire on the upper class people that she was raised with, and Matthew contributed to it. But here on the the third page, we have an essay entitled Christmas. Now remember, this is a year before A Christmas Carol was published by Charles Dickens. People have said that Charles Dickens invented Christmas, which is nonsense. But the truth of it was that Christmas was not celebrated as eagerly as it was in Europe and in England. Matthew knew that, and that's what this essay is about. He is encouraging Americans to celebrate Christmas in the way that they do in England, see? All this means is it makes it that much more plausible that Matthew and Abby could have set A Christmas Carol in London. And Matthew had spent many years in New York City, so he knew the cities. He knew what it was like, the cities of that era. But he would have set it in London because he knew that Christmas was celebrated there more than it was in America. So it's just a little piece of evidence. It's one of these pieces of cumulative evidence that's not sufficient in and of itself, but it's significant. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. Now, first of all, whereas the previous story is signed a Down Easter, which is typical of Matthew and Abby's kind of one-off signatures that nobody could penetrate, this is signed Poins. And Poins I have absolutely 100% identified as Mathew Franklin Whittier's signature in this paper. So this is definitely his essay. So it's titled Christmas. It says original in brackets, which means that he wrote it for the Portland transcript. We ever hail with gladness the annual return of our New England Thanksgiving festival. It comes laden with associations dear to every true-hearted son of the Pilgrim land. He loves to travel back in the road of memory to that remote period in the history of the New World when it was first instituted, and contemplate the stern integrity and fervent, though perhaps somewhat erring, piety of its founders. Remember, Matthew was Quaker, raised Quaker, and the Quakers were persecuted by the Puritans. And with no less pleasurable emotions do we greet the birthday of our national freedom. And as we are awakened by the cannon's voice heralding in the glorious day, as we look out and behold the proud banner of our country floating on the genial summer airs, Our heart is always glad, and we bless God that the, quote, lines have fallen to us in pleasant places, that this is the land of our birth. But the emotions we have mentioned are local. The field is not broad. In the one case, we feel as a New Englander, and in the other as a citizen of these United States. But with regard to Christmas, the case is different. Here, no, quote, pent Utica restricts us, confining our feelings in its narrow walls, as in those cases. There, we merely felt as a citizen, here as a man. One of the first commemorates a grand epoch in the history of a people, a fragment of the mighty mass. This pertains to the world. It commemorates the most important and most stupendous event in its history from the time when, in obedience to the fiat of Jehovah, it assumed its form to the present, the incarnation of the eternal God. For 18 centuries, this day has been celebrated throughout Christendom. When Luther's besom of reform swept the forms and mummeries of Catholicism from priest-ridden Europe, this holy festival remained unaffected. Protestant as well as papal rule recognized and observed it. You can see Matthew's particular prejudices in this. In no country, perhaps, where Christianity bears sway, is the natal day of its illustrious founder so little observed as in ours. True, we all recognize its annual return, and by some sects it is observed with due solemnities, but we fall far short in this respect when compared with other Christian nations. England, our motherland, far exceeds us in outward manifestation of veneration for the day. Who that reads is not familiar with the universal joy and hilarity of the Christmas days in, quote, merry old England? It is an annual oasis in the monotonous frigidity of English life. It is the season of universal good feeling, when sundered ties are reunited, when new friendships are formed and old ones strengthened. It is the season of charity. The doors of affluence are opened by its power to the children of penury, and the beggar subsists for many days upon his Christmas alms. It is the burial season of animosities. Old feuds and family schisms are by mutual consent laid in the sepulchre of oblivion, and their obsequies celebrated with smoking viands and foaming ale. It is the season of mirth and innocent amusements. The good old games of blind man's buff, hunt the slipper, and pawns are in high vogue. And last, but not least, the ancient Breton dances by young and old beneath the mystic branch, the, quote, Druids' mistletoe. And it has ever struck us as right and proper that so great an event as the introduction of Christianity into a benighted world should be duly recognized and properly celebrated. With some amendments and curtailing, we would adopt the English manner. We would have it a season of decent rejoicings, a partial, at least, intermission from cares and toil, and above all, we would have it made fashionable for those possessing the means to go about among the haunts of poverty and relieve the wants and sufferings of the poor. Make special note of that, because this is a year before A Christmas Carol came out, and people are crediting Charles Dickens with having, invented Christmas and, invented Christmas as a time of giving to the poor and so on. It's a year before, by the same author. We would also have the innocent amusements of our pattern, but would wish them intermingled with wholesome meditation. We would have all taught that it was not an unmeaning jubilee, but a commemoration of an event of immense interest to all. This season is fraught with food for reflection to the Christian. It is calculated to lead his mind back to the time when the dark valleys round Bethlehem were filled with that more than earthly radiance, and the high and cavernous mountains echoed the seraphic strains of heavenly choristers. As he hears in imagination those angelic voices announcing the glad tidings for all men, his mind will be drawn out from everything like selfishness, remembering that Christ, his master, came to do good to all, And when he reflects that the gospel he professes to follow breathes in its first announcement, quote, peace and goodwill to men, he will lay aside everything like absurd sectarian bigotry and will love, and as opportunity permits, strive to benefit all mankind. Merry Christmas.